Hi, Alec. Thank you so much for helping my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Alec Hutchinson. I'm a current mechanical engineering student at Arizona State University, prior NASA intern, and current NASA Pathways selectee, I guess.
And so what got you into mechanical engineering?
Just a lifelong interest in spaceflight and aerospace and aviation and all that stuff. Like I grew up with the space shuttle and all that stuff, and watching the launches and seeing the International Space Station being put together. And finally, I kind of figured out that I liked math and everything, and decided to go into engineering, and that kind of led me to where I am now. So, what was it?
What are some of the things that you hope to do with your engineering abilities?
Honestly, just I'd love to contribute to NASA's mission and everything. I've been able to leverage that to get a few experiences with the agency, starting with a NASA social before I had gone into engineering years back at NASA Langley, which was actually a water impact test of the Orion spacecraft back maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And then that was what kind of finally sealed the deal in me wanting to go to engineering and do that, because seeing like the NASA offices at Langley, like, oh, this is just like a regular government office. It's like just a normal job, I guess, even though you're dealing with things that are pretty amazing. So after that, went into engineering. Couple semesters went by. I was in the first class in the Space program, the Lucy Space Academy, I guess, the Mission Concept Academy. After that, a couple more semesters, went into the NASA Proposal Academy with Space, and then INCAS, the NASA Community College Aerospace Scholars. Then eventually I transferred to Arizona State University, and I did a NASA internship with NASA Goddard last summer, working on the Lucy mission. So a lot of robotic spaceflight, I guess, up to now. And now, just recently, I was selected to be a NASA Pathways intern with Marshall Space Flight Center, presumably working on the Artemis program going forward. And this would be a civil service position, so I guess I'll just keep coming back as the semesters go on until I finish my degree.
That's pretty awesome. And just talking, since you brought up Artemis, when did you first learn of Artemis?
I mean, I guess I had been following the general progression since, the Constellation program, when that was announced in 2004, 2005, while the space shuttle was still going. So that's when Orion was initially announced, along with, at the time, Ares 1 and Ares 5. Eventually that was a bit of a rocky history with that, and they got nixed. But Orion was eventually saved from the trash pile, I guess, and SLS came into being. I followed those two programs closely before they had, I guess, a name outside of it being NASA's next step after the space shuttle. And eventually, when they were christened Artemis a few years back, I followed even more closely, because now it seemed like NASA had a concrete mission with them, more so than just kind of a nebulous, we'll eventually get to Mars with these, or at least build an architecture to get to Mars with these. So yeah, I guess I've been following it fairly closely from the beginning, like even before I went into engineering or any of that stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Constellation. I remember back when Constellation was announced, George W. Bush, and looking at those timelines in 2020, we were supposed to have a base on the moon.
Right. They had some ambitious dates and everything associated with them. The architecture was interesting, especially considering SLS is almost like a combination of Ares 1 and Ares 5. A little less ambitious than 5 in terms of lifting ability, but not quite the single stick that Ares 1 was. And then it's interesting that they've gone to HLS with commercial, I guess, ownership of the landing system, as opposed to Altair, where it's more traditional contracting structure.
What are your feelings about that, about the more traditional contract structure versus commercial?
I mean, I think that the commercial model has been proven a lot more up to now than it was like early on. I feel like I kind of wish that there had been a second selection with HLS, just so we had a little more coverage in terms of engineering architecture, because there are definitely some risks associated with Starship and its development, and basically putting everything on that. I'm glad that we picked something. Although I just wish that it was a little more like the commercial crew program with the ISS, to where they had been funded to select at least 2 of the proposals, at least to develop to a point where they could select one that seemed the most promising.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting thinking about commercial crew and sort of the original, excuse me, timelines for that and how long that took. And you got to consider where the human landing system is right now. You know, it's equivalent to where maybe commercial crew was back in what, 2013, 2014 time period.
Right. And I remember commercial crew kind of also grew out of commercial cargo. I remember the first Dragon test flight up to the space station in 2012, I think, right after the shuttle retired. I feel like it's the general model is a lot more proven than it used to be, despite my despite having a little bit of skepticism toward the I guess the number of contractors that were selected. But as it stood, NASA didn't have many options on the table there to keep moving forward.
Well, what do you think about Artemis? I mean, is it something that excites you, or do you wish NASA had a different focus?
Oh no, I mean, I've always been, I guess, on the moon team, going back to even when NASA had kind of been directed away from that in the aftermath of Constellation's cancellation. I think it makes more logical sense as a stepping stone onto Mars and beyond, and also just because the moon has a lot more to offer us in terms of exploration and utility than 6 Apollo missions would have you believe. Plus, it just makes more sense to practice our long duration exploration missions at a nearby target like the moon, where help is only a few days away, as opposed to Mars, where you're basically on your own past a certain point. So I'm definitely in favor of the moon being NASA's short to midterm goal, especially building a permanent presence there eventually with Gateway and eventually potentially a surface base. So yeah, in general, I'm happy with the direction NASA has for that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how dependent like the ISS and Apollo and the shuttle were on ground-based systems. You know, having a whole kind of crew of mission controllers and flight controllers monitoring all the systems and debugging issues and doing this type of thing. That won't be available on the way to Mars.
Right. I think beyond, the physiological and engineering challenges, that's one of the biggest differences is that, like, you got a trip that's like 4 to 6 months out, 4 to 6 months back, and then however long you're going to stay on the surface. And then at its furthest, you're going to have like over like what, an hour delay there and back. So whatever's happening, whatever crisis is happening, will probably have a shorter time scale than that. So you've got to have more independence with the crew in terms of their ability to make executive decisions and take care of the problem. Plus, I think that would also require a more widespread skill base among the crew members than Apollo would have had, where take 3 test pilots to send them to the moon. So it'll be interesting to see how all that evolves, especially as Artemis advances and we gain more experience with lunar missions and things like that.
And it's funny looking at kind of sci-fi and movies that have been made about us voyaging beyond the moon, like to Mars and to the Jupiter and places like that. They always seem to have like a machine intelligence that goes along monitoring everything, kind of a stand-in for mission control.
Got a HAL coming along.
Exactly.
So I mean, that's something else, that's also a field that's certainly advanced by leaps and bounds since the days of Apollo and even the shuttle. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes on in the next 10, 15 years as NASA gets closer to its, well, I guess, tentative Mars dates in the mid 2030s and early 2040s, I suppose.
And how confident are you that this time Artemis is going to be different than Constellation?
I feel like maybe it gets into a little bit into the sunk cost fallacy, but I feel like we've advanced far enough that there really isn't much of an alternative, especially now that two different administrations from two different parties have endorsed it, I suppose. But one of the things with Artemis is that was still happening while the space shuttle was going. And there was sort of this hot potato thing going on between presidencies going back to the 90s of this is what we want NASA to do, no, this is what we want NASA to do, and so on and so forth. And then when the shuttle was off the table and the ISS was completed and there wasn't much out there, and they didn't want to get rid of the program entirely, whoever, I guess, directed the program onto its next thing would have a lot more staying power, I think. And that's kind of gone forward with the Biden administration, more or less endorsing Artemis. So I feel like at this point, there's enough progress and steam and inertia behind it that NASA will get there. Maybe not exactly when they want to get there, but I think it will happen.
Do you think we're going to see people on the moon this decade before 2030?
I think so. I think that once they get past the initial humps of Artemis 1 and 2, things will move much more quickly in the program. Because right now is the hard part, I guess, in engineering terms. You have to get all of these disparate systems up and human rated going, and you have to be confident in them. And they've been under development for, in some cases, the better part of 20 years. So I feel like once all that gets up in the air and flying, it'll be better, especially once HLS gets some more milestones down on the development. Because Orion at this point has been basically sitting there since EFT1. They've made changes and updates and everything, but the system has basically been there since then. And then SLS is finally getting around the corner there. Once they finally get that flying, hopefully early-ish next year.
What are your thoughts about Starship and Rocket Labs and all these other launch providers that have come up?
I mean, it's good to see the commercial spaceflight industry flourishing much more than it probably ever has, especially here. Starship is making more progress than I would have expected to this point. I'm still skeptical about when they'll get it in orbit, but at this point, I don't doubt that they will eventually. In terms of all the other companies, it's good to see people getting successful flights under their belts, and I think we have more options for getting things into orbit than we've ever had. So ULA and SpaceX are still definitely the heavyweights for U.S. Space launch capability, but it seems like there are some more viable candidates coming into the playing field.
Did you by chance see the recent update from Rocket Labs about their Neutron rocket that they're planning to develop?
I had read a little bit about it, but I didn't read too closely on that one. What was that?
Well, the interesting thing is the first stage will land on a barge or return to launch site just like SpaceX's, but the fairings, the payload fairings, will actually be part of the first stage. So it kind of like opens up, and then the second stage.
Right.
And then it closes and lands, so no, you don't
That
have to retrieve the fairings or anything.
that kind of reminded me a little bit of the SLA on Apollo 7, where that was before they had it. They jettisoned the panels during Apollo, so they still had these all the panels still attached to the second stage, I guess Saturn would be on that mission. Just like just sitting there floating, coming in and out. So it'll be interesting to see something that's actually designed to do that. Um, and I guess some of that panel technology is also coming into play with the Crew Dragon, with its, I guess, reusable nose cone. I know with Boeing's CST 100, they just, you're just tossing the nose cap after launch and everything. That's something else that's kind of funny is all the pusher abort systems coming into play between Dragon and Starliner and presumably eventually Dream Chaser if it gets crew rated. I guess we've certainly left the era of like tower abort systems with the exception of Orion and Soyuz, I suppose.
Yeah, the Soyuz one actually came in handy not too long back.
Right. That was that. I remember I was on my way to chemistry lab that morning when I heard about the abort. I was like, "Whoa, that's." I guess the last time Soyuz had a launch abort was back in the '80s when they were the pad abort a few seconds before the rocket went up. Like you just suddenly see the capsule get ripped off the top. I guess that was back during. I think it was before a Salyut mission. But yeah, it's interesting. I guess when you fly as much as Soyuz does, eventually you're gonna get a few.
Yeah, they've really kept basically the same designs since what the 60s, huh?
I mean, the basic concept is the same as going back to almost the Gemini era. Uh, obviously the avionics and interior and everything has undergone quite a few changes. Going from the early Soyuz models all the way to the current MS models. But the basic thing, it'd be kind of like if we were using Apollo capsules with MFDs, like the shuttle did with the glass cockpit and everything. Which is kind of interesting to think if we had gone that way instead of with the shuttle, just kept building on Apollo technology, even if we hadn't continued going to the moon, just using it as kind of a shuttle to and from Skylab or any follow-ups to that. Although I do think the shuttle gave us invaluable experience in terms of designing a completely new system and flying it, whatever its shortcomings were. So.
Well, at least it attempted to be reusable.
Right. I mean, and the shuttle, I don't think the shuttle gets enough credit in that respect for pioneering a lot of the technologies that SpaceX and some of its other contemporaries have been using. The shuttle was certainly never cheap in terms of what they wanted to do with it, but it did get a lot of those technologies up and running. I guess one of the biggest things is the shuttle was kind of a victim of compromise, I guess, because a lot of its design features had to be, were a result of NASA and the Air Force having to figure out what was acceptable. And the giant delta wings that are so iconic with it were not something NASA wanted to do early on. It was a result of the Air Force wanting a once around capability where it could launch into a polar orbit and then come back the same trip. And the funny thing is that mission profile actually, to our knowledge, never flew. It was meant to fly out of Vandenberg, and of course that all got knocked off the board after the loss of Challenger in 1986.
Yeah, I actually saw the first time I visited Kennedy Space Center was December of '85, and Challenger was actually at the launch pad. So I remember seeing it. It was supposed to launch in early January, but it had gotten it had like 3 failed attempts before that. So
my first trip out to Kennedy Space Center was actually back in 2005, I think. And I actually got to see Space Shuttle Discovery sitting out on the launch pad ahead of STS-114, the return to flight after the loss of Columbia. Didn't get to see it launch, but we did go up to the top of the that viewing gantry near 39A. and you could see the orange tank poking out from the top because they had the service structure rotated around on it at the time, so you couldn't see the shuttle itself. But that was the only time that I saw a shuttle that was I guess in service. My second encounter was 2012, so right after the shuttles were retired, before they had been dispersed to the museums. They had opened up the VAB briefly before they started retrofitting it for SLS, and they opened it for public tours. And we got to go in there, and there was a Space Shuttle Endeavour just sitting there parked in the VAB, waiting to be carted over to the 747 SCA for its trip out to Los Angeles to be retired to the California Science Center. So I got to see Endeavour like in its natural environment one last time about a week before it left. Just after they got done cleaning it, cleaning the hydrazine and all that other stuff off of it, before it could be properly decommissioned.
That's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome. So I guess when you think about the whole purpose of all this investment in space exploration, how do you explain to people what the purpose is? Where do you see it going?
Obviously a lot of the money spent on spaceflight eventually finds its way down here, and we don't just launch, rockets full of money into orbit, obviously, right? We all of that money gets spent down here and invested into technologies that impact our lives down here. I'm sure NASA has beaten the spinoff from plenty for anyone who's interested. But beyond that, I think we should be able to do things that invest in tomorrow, and the cost of spaceflight is so low, I guess, relative to other large government programs and even private undertakings, that it would be negligent not to pursue it, at least to some extent. There isn't really an opt-out of that. It's kind of like, when you think of space, it really is just like, it's everything that's not Earth, So it's like being in your house and saying, okay, well, I'm just going to pretend like the entire outside world beyond my front yard doesn't exist. And at some point that becomes a major liability, because beyond not experiencing that exploration and understanding those things more, you're going to miss major hazards, that you might have been able to foresee, asteroids and comets. And NASA just recently launched the DART mission out of Vandenberg to further test technology that can be used in the case of a hazardous asteroid or comet or other object. And our space-based infrastructure allows us to potentially have more lead time to react to that, where if we didn't, there's almost nothing you could do in that case. And obviously things like that can get catastrophic really quickly. So even beyond the philosophical stuff of it being in our nature to explore, there are plenty of utilitarian arguments too.
Yeah, and both of those are really powerful arguments, very Earth-centric arguments. But I was wondering, do you see a point where humanity actually grows beyond the Earth, where there might be people who never ever even visit Earth?
I think so. I think that eventually we will establish settlements on the other planets in the solar system. Obviously, anything beyond our solar system is going to be a major question for the future. We don't know what will happen, what kind of breakthroughs will come in the next 100, 200 years. Obviously, someone in 1921 wouldn't have been able to foresee Apollo happening in 1969. But I do see us eventually establishing permanent, even non-professional outposts on these worlds eventually, especially over the next couple of centuries. I don't know how realistic the terraforming desire is, but you don't necessarily need that to have a self-sustaining environment. It would be tough, obviously, but I think that we'll eventually get it done as time goes on with Mars and the Moon, and potentially even beyond that.
As you mentioned, like in the 1980s, envisioning Apollo would have been probably the result of using some, psychedelics or something.
Yeah.
But if you were to kind of map out a path where we go from being strictly on Earth to being, really citizens of the whole solar system and beyond, what does that path look like to you? Like, what do you think is most likely?
I feel like government-led space exploration will still be at the forefront of that, with NASA and the other partner space agencies. I also think that commercial space organizations will play an important role in that. I hope that it's not monopolized by one or the other, because I feel like you can get some negative effects from that, particularly if a single company, say SpaceX or whoever, is the only authority on whatever interplanetary settlement you've set up. I think the logical path forward would be Artemis running its course and us getting infrastructure set up around the moon with Gateway and hopefully on the lunar surface eventually after that. And then after that, as SpaceX advances in its infrastructure like Starship and so on, assuming that they're able to get everything running and cost effective, I think that things will just kind of naturally grow out of that, with NASA eventually shifting its focus onto Mars. And I'm sure SpaceX and these other commercial and international organizations will play a role in that too. I think it's a matter of getting these technologies to the point where we can use them effectively, like nuclear thermal propulsion for Mars, for example, cutting down the trip time, getting more efficient engines up there. And thankfully, it seems like NASA and NASA Marshall in particular are trying to take that more seriously than they have in the past since the days of NERVA. So hopefully with propulsion advances and advancements in our understanding of these deep space, eclipse systems, life support systems, making sure people can survive in these environments for extended periods of time, things will just kind of organically grow from there. Obviously, Mars is going to be the logical target for anything like that, since it has an atmosphere and it's the only place that's reachable in under a year's time that you'd want to go, because obviously Venus, for the time being, is going to be off the table. I think that's just how things will advance over the next 20, 30, 40 years. But honestly, beyond Artemis and everything, it's kind of speculation as to what will happen and what kind of technological and political breakthroughs will occur between now and then.
I keep thinking about Venus and Mars. If we could just average them out, we have two perfect planets.
Right. If you just give a little bit of the atmosphere of Venus to Mars and a little bit of the not boiling, melting surface to Venus, then that'd be nice. I remember like during winter, there are some places on Mars that were warmer than some places in North America. It's like, it's not that bad temperature-wise. It's just the 0.01% atmosphere that to worry about. Yeah, but I think that things will eventually advance from that. Obviously, for now, for the next decade and a half, obviously the moon is going to be NASA's overriding concern. Kind of like how low Earth orbit was its concern after in the aftermath of Apollo. Apollo was great for getting to the moon quickly, but for sustainability without a massive political investment, which just wasn't going to likely happen at the time, there wasn't much you could do with it. So now hopefully this will build an infrastructure, especially with the addition of commercial partners, that can be kept going even when the political support isn't as much as present as it is now.
What do you see as being the biggest threats to humanity extending beyond Earth?
Honestly, just perhaps our inability to think in the long term, I guess. It's one of the reasons why a return to the moon has been kind of like pulling teeth up to this point. It's not something that the president who starts it is going to see the payoff of, in all likelihood. And not without investing sums of money that would make even the most space-friendly administration's eyes water. so I feel like getting the support and the coalition together is one of the most important things. And I think NASA has done an effective job this time with the Artemis Accords and everything, getting all these different countries to sign on and support it, kind of like how the International Space Station was done, so that no one country is shouldering the entire burden. Even if at the end of the day, it's primarily an American program, we have a lot of stakeholders in it that are, both international and commercial in nature. And I feel like that's what separates it from prior attempts and Apollo and everything. Apollo obviously had commercial involvement since it was contractors that built the entire system, but NASA was still, the one crewing it and running it at the end of the day. And obviously there wasn't much international involvement at the time, since one of the points of the program was to get there ahead of the Soviets, right? And this is well before any reasonable European space program or anything else.
Yeah, it's amazing how many countries have space agencies now and are sending astronauts either through the US or Europe or Russia. And yeah, it's really amazing. I talk about astronauts. If it was safe and affordable, would you go to space?
Absolutely. I'd love to go, regardless of where the destination is. And throwing out an application for NASA's astronaut selection process has been something that's kind of in the back of my mind. Eventually, maybe once I've got everything finished and a few years of experience, hopefully with the agency under my belt, since now I've kind of got a path forward to civil service employment with NASA with this pathways position, and especially working in human spaceflight, which is kind of my passion. Marshall's one of the best places to be for that. Since NASA's big three, I guess, for that would be Johnson Space Center in Houston, Marshall in Huntsville, and Kennedy in Florida. So I'm excited for that, and would absolutely jump at the chance to go to space, whether as a professional astronaut or as a spaceflight participant with some other organization.
Would you consider immigrating to Mars?
I guess it would depend on the conditions there in terms of who's running it, what kind of sustainability they've got, and all that. If you're talking permanently, I'd love to visit, but with moving there permanent, it would definitely depend on the circumstances that had arisen there. Now the moon, I'd love to visit if Artemis does get it to the point that I think NASA's goal is. Although I do hope,
go ahead.
I do hope that the Apollo sites are protected as historical centers, regardless of what happens with that. Historical preserves at all 6 landing sites.
Are you familiar with For All Moonkind?
Yes, I am actually. I know that Mike Mullane was a big part of that particular initiative, and actually reading his memoirs a few years back was one of the things that made me want to pursue all this stuff professionally. So yeah, I definitely support them trying to get these sites protected from future exploitation, I suppose.
That's a challenge, because that's going to be one of the things everyone wants to see.
And the enforcement will definitely be difficult outside of just having, I guess, some legal recourse. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses, as well as the moon becomes more of a real place, I guess, for a lot of people. Obviously it's always been up there, but I guess hopefully going forward in the next few decades, people will start thinking of it as a location, a destination, than just, the moon.
I kind of see this series of videos as being, the target audiences for people not even born yet. Kind of my kind of focus group is, a high school class on Mars, like 200 years from now, doing a project on us right before Artemis. Is there anything you think would be good for them to know?
I guess I hope that if we do get to that point, we don't take it for granted and we build out sustainably going forward. I hope we keep putting exploration and science at the forefront of that. obviously you need to have utility, but it's also good to do things just for the sake of understanding things. And I hope that all of this groundwork results in a much better future for everyone.
Those are definitely good thoughts. That's all the questions I had for you, but I was wondering if maybe you had some questions for me.
I guess my only question would be, so what made you think to do this project?
Do you remember Artemis Day back in 2019?
Right.
And Doug Laverio with his pin that said the number of days to the end of 2024.
Mm-hmm.
And his plans to highlight a NASA person every day that was sort of helping us get us there.
Right. Oh, that's
So
that's
this is
cool.
this is the shadow project.
Okay. That's awesome. I think that I was actually part of one of the Artemis Day NASA socials back in 2019. You know, because I went over to Marshall Space Flight Center for that actually. So I was over at Marshall when all that was happening. So that's cool. Yeah, that's something else. I kind of hope that NASA socials get going in person again eventually. You know, they're a great experience for people, whether you have aspirations of being working in the field professionally, or you just want to see how everything is done up close. I was lucky enough to go to the first Starliner launch at the end of 2019. You know, maybe a few months before everything kind of shut down. And that was a pretty amazing experience to be able to see. You know, it wasn't crewed at the time, obviously, but all of the steps were toward human spaceflight, which hopefully Boeing will get that up and running sometime next year.
It's amazing how things have changed. You know, NASA and Boeing and everybody else thought Boeing would be first, and
Right.
they were talking about trying to extend that first mission because you know, Soyuz flights and delays with SpaceX. And
Right. I mean, if you had asked me to put my money on something, I would have said that Boeing was more likely to fly first. But then, when when all the issues with OFT happened, you know, obviously that put them in a much worse spot. I'm glad they're taking the time to work them out, because obviously this isn't the kind of thing you want to cut corners on when you're flying humans, especially with the kind of frequency that commercial crew will be flying. So hopefully they get all of that ironed out, and we have two good methods to get up to the International Space Station from our own spaceports. And of course, I'm personally hoping the Dream Chaser gets up there too, whenever NASA does another round of commercial crew selections.
I mean, the great thing about Dream Chaser is being able to land at any airport.
Right.
I mean, that's an awesome capability, especially for astronaut safety.
I know that they were just recently putting forward Huntsville as a possible landing site for Dream Chaser, as like one of its primaries. So I know they've been doing studies on the feasibility of that landing at the Huntsville International Airport, which is funny. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it fly. You know, at least we'll be seeing it fly with cargo, hopefully in the next few years, and then hopefully crew after that, because I know Sierra Nevada is still definitely pressing on that. So it'll be good to see Wings getting back in orbit at some point in the future.
It will be neat.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah. I'll always be someone from the shuttle generation, I guess. So it'll be good to see a little something like that return. You know, with all the capsules and things like that are around today.
yeah, absolutely. Just the variety and scale and scope of all the different, you know, ways to get to space and things to do in space is just hard to keep up with, actually.
Right, right. I mean, there's so much, especially when you go into some of the smaller commercial launchers and things. There's a lot going on. You know, arguably more than probably at any other time, at least in terms of all the different initiatives going on right now, both here and abroad for spaceflight. Yeah, it's exciting to see that it's kind of really taking off now after a lot of false starts, kind of, you know, going all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Alec, thank you so much for your time. And if you know of anybody else that'd be willing to participate in my project, I have over 1,100 more days to go. So could use some help.
Well, I'll see if I can get you a few names.
That'd be fantastic. Well, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and maybe I'll see you around NASA sometime.
Oh, hopefully. Thank you. I hope you have a good rest of your day too, and thanks for the interview.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.